Now, this morning we have HASP member Andrew Bissonnette, who received his BA from the University of Notre Dame and a JD from the University of Wyoming College of Law. And after practicing law for 14 years, he was elected as a circuit court judge for Dodge County, Wisconsin, a position he held for 24 years. In addition to his post-retirement role with the Wisconsin Supreme Court, Judge Bissonnette has served both as a bailiff and a mediator in Ottawa County. Andrew.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, George, and thanks, Mary Ellen. And I also want to thank Hannah. Hannah scanned in some photographs and other documents yesterday and sent them out to everybody. And I think she made 15 or 20 handouts today that some people have taken advantage of. As my course proposal or course description indicates, I'm going to start with a little bit of bio on how and why I became a judge, because maybe you'll find it interesting. And then there's quite a few stories that I want to tell of things that happened in my courtroom, people that I observed, incidents or situations that occurred. A number of them are you're going to find amusing. A few you may find heartbreaking. And by and large, most of them will just be downright interesting because it's a unique perspective to be a judge. I was in a county of like 100,000 people. We had 3 circuit court judges. So not a lot of people were able to have that experience. And yet I would say that each of you folks probably have engaging stories as well. I mean, if any of you came up, we asked you to talk about things that happened in your career or in raising your family, I'm sure that you'd have an interesting story, and I'd like to hear it. But today we're going to hear my story. In terms of how and when I became a lawyer or a judge, I can't tell that story without talking about my dad. And by the way, I've got this little earpiece that you're familiar with for HASP presenters. If in the course of blowing my nose or doing anything else that gets out of position and you can't hear me, please let me know or come up and help me get it back situated. I'm only going to drop back about 300 years. No, I'll just say that my wife has done some ancestry work, traced her family and my family's roots back to France. They came from France to Canada in the 1600s and 1700s. They migrated, a number of them moved in the 1840s and 1850s, including down to a community known as Kankakee, Illinois. Anybody ever hear of Kankakee before? Well, okay. And my dad was born on a farm near a rural Catholic church called St. George. He was born in 1924. 1924, if you're a baby, you're 5 years old when the Depression hits. And his parents also got divorced. So he had a kind of a tough childhood coming from a broken marriage during the Depression. He tells stories about being hungry, about walking down the alley with a couple of friends and asking the buddy, can you go inside and see if there's a jar of peanut butter and bring it back out with a spoon? And he ate peanut butter in the alley a number of times, according to his story. He ended up in the Marines during World War II. He was at Guadalcanal. And his father, I should go back a little bit, his father had done some piecework at a factory, a foundry. And the more pieces you did, the more you got paid. And when my dad was 12, he went to the foundry with his dad and he helped so they could make more pieces. But in the process of doing that, his finger got broken when he was 12 years old in the foundry. So again, it was kind of a challenging childhood. But he was in a parish that had not only a Catholic elementary school, but a Catholic high school, St. Patrick's. And despite the difficulties he faced, he did get an education. He did graduate from high school before he went into the Marines. Excuse me. When he came back from the Marines, he went to a Sunday church service at St. Patrick's. And a priest saw him, a priest who had taught him in the high school, approached my dad and said, Maynard, welcome back. And what are your plans? And my grandpa, in the meantime, had bought a tavern in Kankakee. My dad told the priest that his plans were to go and help his dad at the tavern and maybe someday take over the tavern. But the priest had a different view, a different picture of my dad, because my dad was quite intelligent. And the priest knew that. And he said, Maynard, you've heard of the GI Bill? He said, yeah, I heard something. I don't know much about it. The GI Bill would pay for you to go to college. You could get a college degree. You could do something more than just helping to manage the tavern. And he ended up convincing my dad to go to St. Ambrose College in Davenport, Iowa. This discussion was only like a month before the fall semester started.
Smith was
But
down there.
this priest had
really?
connections
Yeah.
at St.
She
Ambrose.
says
Got
she
my
has
dad
to be
in.
moving.
On the day that my dad
For
needed to
the-
travel from Kankakee to St. Ambrose, the priest drove him there. He ended up getting a degree in accounting, and he worked for General Mills in Kankakee. There was a plant there. I think it made dog food. And while he was there in the accounting department, sometimes he would see these guys coming in wearing suits and meeting with the upper echelon of the management of the facility. And he asked a buddy, who are these guys that are coming in and always dressed in these suits? And his buddy said, they're called lawyers. Those guys are lawyers. And my dad looked at the other guy and said, you know what? It seems like that's what I should be. I should be a lawyer. He applied and got into University of Notre Dame Law School. I was already born. And my dad was in law school there from 50 to 53. He graduated second in his class in 1953. But in the meantime, he and my mom and I lived in a place called Vettville. Vettville was a place set aside for married students at Notre Dame following the war, married students who were on the GI Bill. And the housing that they had for the vets were former prisoner of war barracks that had come from Oklahoma or Kansas, I can't remember where. And there's a big library. Most of you, I shouldn't say most of you, a number of you have probably been to the campus at Notre Dame. The Hesburgh Library is like a 13-story library. It's one of the biggest in the country, college library. And there's about a 10 or 12-story mosaic on the front of it with Jesus facing the football stadium looking like this. So everybody affectionately called him Touchdown Jesus. But if you go to that library right now and you go to the east, I think it's the east side of that library, there's a little plaque, not much bigger than a piece of paper, but there's a little plaque saying this was the site of Vettville. Where the library is was the site of Vettville in the 1940s and early 50s. And my folks sometimes went out, and maybe they'd go out and visit with other friends or go into town or something. And so they would need a babysitter for me. And the guy who babysat me more often than any other was named John Latner. Anybody ever hear of John Latner? Yeah. Heisman Trophy winner. It's correct. He was a halfback at Notre Dame in 1952, 1953, All-American both years. Won the Heisman Trophy in 1953. That was my babysitter. I don't remember him giving me a game ball or a football, but I do remember having a football that my dad said John Latner had given us. It was like an official game ball, a leather ball that had Notre Dame kind of embossed on it. And I remember playing that with that ball and using that ball as a kid to the point that we destroyed it. I mean, sometimes we left it out in the rain or we mishandled it or whatever. We ended up dying of abuse and neglect. But anyway, so my dad finished law school, headed back to Kankakee, and became one of the best known and well-respected lawyers in the community. When I was about 4 or 5 years old and maybe a little older, people would come up to me, friends and family primarily, and say, "Are you going to be a lawyer like your daddy? Are you going to go to Notre Dame like your daddy?" Well, I didn't know what being a lawyer meant that much, but and Notre Dame I knew was a place. I didn't know what it meant to go to Notre Dame, but I knew of Notre Dame. But I learned that if I said yes to those questions, people would respond positively. So I always said yes. Oh yes, I'm going to go to Notre Dame. I'm going to be a lawyer. But as life twists and turns, I almost didn't finish at Notre Dame. I almost didn't become a lawyer. I had 2 years at Notre Dame. Then I transferred to Fordham in the Bronx. And don't ask me why, but maybe it was because it was a little closer to all the action on the East Coast. It was the Vietnam War years, the anti-war years. But for some reason, I had this brilliant idea that after spending my junior year at Fordham, I'd graduate with my senior year at Southern Cal or UCLA. And Debbie Martin was a former on and off girlfriend. Debbie's here, my wife. We met in second grade. But I checked in with her that summer after my junior year, and I said, "I think I'm going to USC or UCLA." And she thought, "Are you crazy? Get back to Notre Dame. It's a great school, and your dad's willing to pay for you to go there." And she convinced me basically to go back to Notre Dame. And we got married a week after I graduated from Notre Dame. During my time in college, I thought about becoming a teacher, like a high school teacher. But in my last year there at Notre Dame, I took the LSAT, which you take for law school. I scored very well on it, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go to law school. And we worked for a year. Debbie and I both worked for a year before I went to law school, so we'd have some money to get to law school and to pay for tuition. But once that year went by and I applied to 6 or 7 law schools, I only got accepted at 2 or 3. One of them is University of Wyoming. And we decided to go ahead and go to Wyoming. So we were in Laramie, Wyoming for 3 years, where the law professors all wore like cowboy boots and cowboy hats and Western ties and drove pickup trucks with a gun across the back window. Not every law professor, but a lot of them fit that description. Then I got my law degree there. My dad was second in his class at Notre Dame. I was fourth in my class at Wyoming. It was not as distinguished as what my dad did, but I still did pretty well. I ended up applying for jobs in Wisconsin, and Debbie had vacationed near Lake Lawn Lodge or Lake Geneva as a kid. And as a kid, I had vacationed up in northern Wisconsin around Eagle River, Rhinelander. So we both liked Wisconsin, and I applied for work there. I only got one positive response, and that was a little tentative. And I said, "I'll work for nothing. Just let me get my foot in the door." Anyway, they said, okay. So they hired me for a salary of $7,500 a year in 1975. But after a couple of months, I got a raise to 9,000. And then a month later, I got a raise to 10,000. And eventually we survived. Excuse me. There were 3 judges in Dodge County, Wisconsin, which is where I was practicing. And one of them was named Henry Gergen. Excuse me. Henry was a grandfatherly, very wise guy, wise judge, well-informed, but he was very patient, and he really demonstrated a level of care for what he was doing, and even a level of care for the people in his courtroom. I loved the guy. And he appointed me frequently. I got there 3 years before the state public defender system started, which is under which certain lawyers were given state jobs paid by the state to defend indigent criminal defendants. But in the 3 years before that system started, from 75 to 78, the judges would appoint local attorneys to represent indigent defendants. Henry Gergen often appointed me. So we got to know each other pretty well. And a lot of the cases were prison cases because in Waupun, Wisconsin, at the north end of our county, there were 4 prisons. So I had a number of cases of prison assault, prison escape, other types of things. And over the first couple of years, I realized that at Henry Gergen's end of the courthouse, people were really treated well and really loved Henry and respected his decisions. Even if people lost, they could see that there was a strong legal logic or a good reason why they lost. And Henry would demonstrate that he did listen to them. He did hear them. He did repeat some of the things they had to say. So they knew that they had been heard. At the other end of the courthouse was more of an arrogant judge. I think in the past, sometimes I've referred to him as an arrogant SOB, but it's a little bit overstating it, but not too much. He really didn't want to do work. He'd rather be in his office reading Time magazine. And so if you showed up for a trial, he'd say, Bissonnette, why didn't you settle this case? Get out there and settle this case. We're not going to try this case. You're going to settle it. And if it's a trial to the court, like a divorce, you don't want to get the judge too upset, but he almost felt like he was threatening to decide against your client unless you went out there and made another effort to settle the case. Excuse me, this other judge was not very patient, and I was less than impressed. So what I saw, or what I came away with, was the idea that being a judge was a very important position, and it should be done right, so that people would have respect for the court and want to support the court. People who would have a case, it might be a small claims case, or maybe it was a divorce, or possibly an accident case, but whatever case they came in on, their opinion of the whole judiciary system across the whole country was based on how their case got handled in the local courtroom. And so that put a lot of responsibility, I thought, on a judge. But I felt up to it. And like that Henry Gergen had been a good role model. And I think I could do this. And I talked to Henry about it. He saw something in me or knew something about me. He encouraged me. 1984, Henry Gergen retired. I ran to replace him with 4 other people, with 5-way race. I came in 5th. There's a picture of a billboard. Some salesman, wise guy, convinced me to buy like 3 billboards. Didn't help very much. But I was only 100 votes out of 4th place. So if the top 3 weren't in there, I was going to have a really close race. But I had told people that I was going to work harder than any other candidate. But the winning candidate, who was only like 2 years older than me, ran circles around me. I mean, he worked his ass off. But he was also a local boy. I mean, he was not only raised in Dodge County, but he was raised in the county seat. He grew up about 3 blocks from the courthouse. He had a lot of friends, a lot of family. And every weekend, they would all get in a big caravan and go to some city or village or combination. Go door to door, passing out brochures and everything else. Anyway, I got to see how he had run that campaign. And Henry Gergen didn't endorse anybody because it was his office, his position. But the election is in the spring. You don't take office till August 1st. And as the sitting judge, he didn't want to play favorites. So he did not endorse anybody in 1984. 1989, another judge retired, opening up another position for people to run for the office. Another 5-way race. This time I came in first because I had learned a lot in 1984. And in 1989, from January 1st until the primary. There's a primary election on February 21st. So back about, what, 6, 7 weeks. I had a series of index cards. I had an index card for each day. You know, January 2nd, another card for January 3rd, another card for January 4th. And I filled those cards out. In December, I was calling all the town board secretaries, city council people, the volunteer fire department officers, setting up opportunities for me to speak to all these different entities. And I would go to 2 or 3 of these a night from January 2nd until February 21st. So I hit like every town board, village council, city council, volunteer fire department, Rotary, Lions, whatever. And that made a big difference. One of the other things is that when I was living in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin for those years, I ended up being the president of the community theater twice, president of the Lions Club twice, president of the area orchestra, president of the Kiwanis Club, founding president of Habitat for Humanity for Dodge County. Anyway, and I shouldn't say a lot, but at least 3 of those presidencies were between 1984 and 1989. So in 1989, people knew me better. They knew I was contributing to the community, and they gave me their support. And there was a debate one time in the evening. It was on the radio. They sponsored the debate. And my opponent was a woman. Actually, she was actually a good friend of mine. But the 2 of us had gotten through the primary. And in regard to my involvement in the community, she said, I can't even hardly believe what he's claiming that he's done in the community. How could anybody have time to do all that and still practice law? When I got home that evening from the debate, my wife said, you should have told her the truth, the truthful answer for how you could do it, and she couldn't. And I said, what would be the truthful answer? She said, you have a wife. She doesn't. So anyway. So let me just start by talking about drunk driving cases. Some people say, what was your most difficult case or difficult type of case? And drunk driving homicides were always very challenging, because on one side of the room at the sentencing, or at any other hearing, but particularly a sentencing, one side of the room felt that this driver had committed murder. He had killed their husband or their father or his brother or son, whatever it was. And many of them used the word murder. And on the other side of the courtroom were people who knew that this driver didn't have any prior criminal history, had no intent to go out and hit somebody or kill somebody. His intent was just to get home again one more night. In fact, one of the cases, the lawyer made a good argument about his client who was in a drunk driving accident. In fact, this guy had killed a young woman who had been married for a year or 2 before she died. And she was pregnant. She was about 5 months pregnant. And he was an insurance executive, about 64, 65 years old, no prior record. He barely crossed the center line, but there was enough to collide with her. She was in kind of a coma, and actually more than a coma. She was pretty practically brain dead. But the doctors talked to the young husband and said, we can't save your wife, but we could keep her alive enough to save the baby. Talk about a challenging situation. At the sentencing, the young man said that there's no way that he could raise this child on his own without her as a mother. So they disconnected both of them. And so that was a pretty powerful situation. And the defendant's attorney said, Judge, if you asked everybody in this courtroom to stand up who's ever driven when they thought they had really too much to drink, probably 95% of us are going to stand up possibly even you, Judge, which was true, I'm sure. And then if you said, how many of you were lucky enough to make it home one more time, intoxicated, without having a fatal accident, sit down. Everybody in the courtroom would sit except my client. But his intent on driving home that night wasn't any different than your intent on driving home the time that you did it, which is a pretty powerful situation. Another guy named Nicholas Gross. Nicholas Gross, when he had his drunk driving homicide situation or case, it was his third. He had 2 prior drunk drivings, and when he crossed the center line and hit a family that was in a van, he killed the mother. He turned a young girl, I think she was about 12 or 13 at the time of the accident, into a not a quadriplegic, I believe it was a paraplegic, but confined to bed for the most part. And so in Wisconsin, a judge can put somebody on probation, like for a drunk driving, and as a condition of probation and order up to a year in jail. Or the judge could order a prison sentence for 10 years, 15 years, whatever. As difficult as it was, I think I ended up ordering probation on the insurance man, despite the situation with the young mother. But on Nicholas Gross, where he had 2 prior OWIs, I had no problem in slamming the prison door on him pretty hard. I think I gave him 15 or 18 years. But anyway, it was really difficult having the people on one side view the charge so differently than the other side. And I had to somehow render a decision and state a sentence that would satisfy the people and satisfy the community. There's another case I'm thinking of. There was a young man, underage, I mean, he was like 16. And he and his buddies each had a can of beer. And then they got into the juvenile's vehicle, and were driving along. And at some point, the driver leaned over to adjust the radio and ran into a power pole, which was right alongside the edge of the street. His best friend in the passenger seat with no seatbelt on got killed in that accident. And now there's a hearing in front of me on whether or not to waive my juvenile court jurisdiction so that he could be prosecuted as an adult and be subject to going into adult prison and adult jail and everything else. The district attorney called the mother of the decedent to the stand. The defense attorney was Bruce Albert. My wife probably remembers Bruce Albert. Bruce objected, saying, "Judge, why are we hearing from the mother? That's not a factor in this decision on whether or not to waive your jurisdiction." The DA said, "Well, the mother's testimony will underscore that this was a really serious charge." The defense attorney said, "Hey, he's charged with a homicide. It is serious. We acknowledge that. We don't need to hear from her." And I said, "Mr. Albert, I think you're right, except in a way you're wrong. Because I think this lady has something she needs to say and something your client needs to hear. So I'm going to overrule your objection and let her testify." Part of her testimony was as follows. "Judge Bissonnette, I've always been a religious person my whole life. I've gone to church every Sunday that I can think of. And despite that, I still don't know, I didn't know if there was a heaven or a hell. I still don't know if there's a heaven, but I have found that there is a hell. And hell is when you want something so much with every fiber of your being, and you're never going to get it. And what I want is to hear my son laugh again." I was so happy that I let her make her statement because that was important to her. I probably cry more than any man you know. When we were first married, we used to watch old movies. Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald, Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant. And during each of those old movies was usually a time that I would call the cry part. Well, I'd ask Debbie, is this the cry part? Anyway, there was a case where a father petitioned the court, filed a motion to enforce his visitation rights. Had been a divorce. The people got divorced in Milwaukee County, about an hour away from where we were. After the divorce, the mother, the wife, came up to our county into a small community of about 1,500 people and brought the boy along. It was like what is he, maybe 4 years old? 4 or 5 years old, I think he was. Brought him, and the ex-husband was entitled to visitation for a weekend, every other weekend. But his complaint to me was that instead of being able to pick the child up and go wherever he wanted, including back home to Milwaukee, his ex-wife insisted that he stay in that small community that she lived in, or even stay in the house that she was in. And the mother said, yeah, I did that because there's like murderers in Milwaukee, and there's like rapists and like drug dealers, and I don't want my son to be anywhere near there. And the young father said, well, Your Honor, this was a kind of a fixer-up house, and we spent a lot of time and effort and really made it quite nice. And it's across the street from a park, and it's 2 blocks away from an elementary school, and I should be able to take my son there or wherever I want every other weekend. The mother said, the other thing, Judge, he doesn't follow the approved food list. I said, well, what in the heck is the approved food list? Oh, it's something I put together and I gave it to him. And it says, only serve him white bread with the crust cut off. He'll eat macaroni and cheese. He'll eat cheese pizza. Don't get some other kind of pizza and pick the stuff off. The kid knows the difference. White milk, I'm trying to remember. I think white milk was with the dessert. Chocolate milk was with the dinner. And the child would only eat broccoli. It was one of the only vegetables he would eat. But he would only eat broccoli if you held the stalk of broccoli in your hand and you held it towards him and you pretended like you were a tree, he was a dinosaur. And so then he would start biting at the broccoli. And as he did it, you should go, ooh, ooh, ooh. This is true, okay? And this lady, during this hearing, this lady kept interrupting me and interrupting her ex-husband. She was really hard to control. And as you probably understand and imagine, in a courtroom, it's better if one person speaks at a time. There's a court reporter who's taking things down, but she kept walking or talking right over us. Now it's at the end of that hearing, and I'm going to make my decision. And I start out by saying, you know, this really isn't a white bread world. And it might be interesting for this young person at some time to have like a ham and rye sandwich, or maybe even a pepperoni pizza. So she starts to argue with me as she knows where I'm going on this decision. Now she's arguing with me. I said, look, lady, just be quiet. I've listened to you for like 2 hours. And even over my order, you kept interrupting the court and interrupting your ex-husband. So I don't want to hear any more. If I wanted to argue with you, I would have married you. And then I thought, what in the hell did I just say? And then the next day I got a transcript from my court reporter saying, here, Judge, this is one of your best ones. That lady was really surprised when I said that. All right. There's a power and control wheel that was in your handout, and it might be on your phone. But I used to keep a stack of the power and control wheel. A stack of those were on my bench. Typically, there would be a battery, a domestic abuse battery. A battery is inflicting injury without consent. So it might be a guy slapping his wife or kicking her or punching her or whatever. They would get charged with a battery. But the battery, the physical violence itself, isn't the only way that people can be abusive or controlling. And this power and control wheel shows all the ways that somebody might control somebody else. Usually it's a man trying to control a woman, probably 90% of the time. And he might do it by threatening to kill a pet, or actually killing a pet, or threatening to commit suicide, or by isolating her and keeping her away from her friends, or making her feel like she's mentally ill, or controlling the purse strings so she has no finances, no freedom, taking the car keys away, whatever. And unfortunately, many of the women who were abused ended up recanting for one reason or another. I think one of the primary reasons was financially, that maybe she couldn't make it on her own with her kid without the income that the guy was bringing in. So frequently she would recant, but whether she recanted or not, every time I did a sentencing on a domestic violence case, I had the bailiff hand out the power and control wheel to the victim and to the offender. And I would go through it and say, there's like 8 sections here. Let's think of the 8 sections as like cylinders on a car. In your relationship, you're on 5 of these cylinders. It's not just the punching or the kicking, it's all these other things. And I might say there's lethality factors present in your case. And she might wonder, what in the heck's a lethality factor? And I would say, I'm not predicting that your boyfriend is going to kill you. I'm just going to tell you that for most of the women who are killed by their lovers or boyfriend, they had circumstances similar to what you have. They had a history similar to what you have. And the lethality factors, the factors that indicated a higher likelihood of homicide, would include that he had ever put his hands around her neck, that he had ever threatened to kill her, that he had ever threatened her with a gun or a knife while he was intoxicated or under the influence of drugs, whether he had in fact killed a pet. So there's a number of these things that were like red flags. And I would tell them both, whether they were separating or whether they were going back together. I would highlight what I saw in their relationship. And I thought it was pretty sad, to be honest, that a lot of times women would recant and they might go through this. I think I heard that leaving is not, I can't remember how it's worded. Leaving is a process. So sometimes the woman would have to leave the man several times before she could break up. But unfortunately, another feature that I saw of domestic abuse victims is that frequently they would search out and enter a new relationship that was also abusive. And it was hard to understand, anyway. So I tried to deal with those in a way that informed the victim that nobody deserved to be treated like she was being treated, and encourage her to stand up or to leave. John Stork, so it took about half my program to get to John Stork, Debbie. But John Stork is a guy I love. He was a colleague of mine. Grew up in Dodge County in a town called Mayville, like 4,000 people. His dad was a lawyer. John was brilliant, went to Harvard Law School. He was in the same class as Chief Justice John Roberts. And his dad said, once I sent my son off to Harvard, I thought there's no way in hell he's going to come back and practice law in Mayville, Wisconsin. But sure enough, he did. And John was about 5 years younger than me. His kids were 5 years younger than our kids. He took the bench 5 years after I did. And we made a great team. We were both interested in developing forms, systems, processes, checklists, everything we could to make our job easier, to make the clerk's job easier, to be more efficient, and just to do a better job. And we would meet every week. We wanted to meet and talk about these things. There was another judge, third judge for much of my career. And towards the end of my career, there was actually 2 more judges. They gave us a 4th judge in our county. These other judges were not as enthusiastic about all these meetings and about trying to change all the processes or improve them. And after I retired, the weekly meetings kind of fell into disuse. I mean, and John got reelected for a 4th term in 2013 when I retired. So he could have had 6 more years, but after 2 more years, he retired. And I talked to him. I said, John, you're one of the best judges in the state. I mean, and you enjoy your work. I can't believe you're retiring in the middle of the term. He said, well, Andy, after you left, it just wasn't as much fun anymore. John brought a tray of brownies to work one day because he invited the IT people. There was a circuit court automation project, computerized the whole Wisconsin court system. We were one of the most computerized systems in the country. And John invited a few of those people from Madison to come out and meet with him and some of our clerk of courts staff about some new feature on the computer. And he brought this tray of brownies. And anytime somebody brought any sweets to the courthouse, I was always one of the first ones to hear about it because I had the biggest sweet tooth in the courthouse. I was prone to saying, I hate it when people force me to eat these sweets by telling me where they're at. But anyway, I had one of John Stark's brownies, and at lunch, I went to his office. Said, John, I love the brownies. Tell Paula that I really enjoyed the brownies. And he said, oh no, Andy, he said, Paula didn't make these. I made them myself. It was a box mix, and I had to add like water and the egg and mix it all up. And I said, well, John, what I really liked most about these brownies is they had chocolate chips in them. He said, they did. He said, when I was stirring up the batter, there were these little lumps, and I kept stirring and stirring. Anyway, I love the guy. He emceed my retirement party, and at that time, he said, Judge Bissonnette wasn't just a good judge. He was a great judge. 2 years later, I said the same thing about him when I emceed his retirement. When I got elected, there's two other judges, and they said, Andy, congratulations. We're going to give you all the juvenile cases. We're going to give you all the mental commitments. We're going to give you all the divorce, which divorce was 3 days a week. We're going to give you all the criminal misdemeanors. And I thought, wow, did I win the election or did I lose? Anyway, so I had all the juvenile cases. And some of the juvenile cases were petitions to terminate somebody's parental rights because of neglect or abuse or something like that. There was only one, there were jury instruction committees. There was a criminal jury instruction committee made up of like 9 judges and a lawyer from the law school. And there's a civil jury instruction committee, similarly made up. But there was no juvenile jury instruction committee. And the one juvenile instruction that existed was created by the civil committee. And experienced juvenile judges said it's not adequate. It's not a good description or instruction. And you don't want to do a bad instruction and terminate somebody's rights only to have it get appealed and reversed. You want to do it right the first time. Anyway, I had a number of these petitions filed, although they didn't go to trial, but I was concerned if they did, how in the heck I would instruct the jury. We had a judicial conference, annual judicial conference every year in the fall. So the fall of 1989, I went to my first judicial conference. In 1990, I'm going to my second one. In 1990, I made a motion at the business meeting. We had all the judges from the state. My motion was to create a juvenile jury instruction committee. And I had talked to a bunch of juvenile law judges about the need for this and about who would be good to be on the committee. So my motion was not only to create this juvenile jury instruction committee, but also to approve John Foley and Mike Malmstad and Chris Foley and John Franke and Dick Dietz and Moria Krieger. Anyway, I had nine of us, 6 of whom were I thought the best juvenile judges in the state. We had 3 from Milwaukee whose assignment was nothing but juvenile, full-time. And all 3 of those guys said, oh, we would love to be on the committee. So my motion was to create the committee with these 9 people, including me and one other guy that we were both kind of from rural, small town, small county venues with not a lot of juvenile cases going on. But I thought we needed some representation. Anyway, that motion was approved unanimously at the business meeting of the judges. So I didn't realize it, but I had created a standing committee with 9 members. And I served as the chairman, even though I wasn't great on juvenile law. I was pretty good at organizing and setting meetings and scheduling things with resorts. Because we followed the example of the Criminal Law Instruction Committee and the Civil Law Instruction Committee and had our winter meetings in Madison or Milwaukee. But we would have the rest of our meetings at Lake Geneva or Spring Green or Minocqua or any of a number of vacation places. And we got along famously. We had a lot of good belly laughs. We did some golf outings. We'd maybe golf the afternoon before the first day of our meeting, or we'd golf on the Friday afternoon at the end of our meeting. And any number of the people on this committee said it was the best committee they'd ever served on, the most fun they ever had. And during the next 10 years, and I was a committee chair for 10 years, we created 2 different publications of Juvenile Jury Instruction Committee, or the Juvenile Jury Instructions. The law school marketed those instructions and also made them available to the court IT system so that any judge in Wisconsin could get any juvenile instruction on their computer with just a couple of keystrokes. So we really did a good job. And I have to hand it to the guys from Milwaukee. They were like our MVPs or our all-stars because they had seen it all. There was hardly any juvenile jury situation that you could mention that they hadn't seen. And they were a great draftsman for the jury instructions. So a rule got created in the judiciary that you can only serve 2 3-year terms on a committee. So you guys on the juvenile jury committee that you've been on there for 9 or 10 years, you're going to have to get off. And at the annual meeting, each of the committee chairs would give a report during the business meeting, would give a report to all the judges of the state. And so I did that for the juvenile committee for 10 years. And in 2000, I got up in front of all the judges and said, this is my last year. I need to leave because of the amount of time I've been on the committee. And I gave a report. And then at the end of the report, I said, you guys, I don't mean to like be bragging in front of the whole judiciary, But I just want it to be known that I did graduate from the highest ranked law school in the country, University of Wyoming, 7,200 feet above sea level. By far the highest ranked law school in the country. And John Stork, my good buddy John Stork, sitting in the front like usual. John, you graduated from a place called, was it Harvard? And what was it, like 20 feet above sea level? Talk about domestic abuse. There was a murder case. Let me blow my nose one more time. A guy named Terry Apel lived with his girlfriend and her daughter. He went out one night and got drunk, came home, had a big fight with his girlfriend. And it got violent. And he ended up taking her and her daughter out to a shed, an outbuilding. He took them there at gunpoint. And once they were in the shed, he had them kneel down, facing away from him. And he took a hammer and hit each of them in the top of the head with a hammer, driving the hammer through the skull. I mean, it was not a good situation. The 13-year-old died pretty much instantly. The mother survived. Now he's charged with murder and attempted murder, and he's in the Dodge County Jail. The witness against him was going to be his girlfriend. But if she could get knocked off or disappeared, then there might not be enough evidence to convict him. So he starts talking to another inmate about what he would need to do or how much he would need to pay to make his girlfriend disappear. That inmate ended up talking to his lawyer, and his lawyer went to the district attorney, and they decided to cooperate and see how far this guy would go to kill his ex-girlfriend. So they made up a letter, and somebody said they could do this for him, but he would need $5,000 down, and the total price would be like $25,000. Well, within a week after being provided with that letter, he had the $5,000. And then pretty soon, the authorities said, "Hey, the jig is up. We're charging you with a conspiracy to kill your ex-girlfriend." Well, I forgot one thing that was of significance. After he had hit each of them in the head with a hammer and thought he had killed them both, he had some type of remorse. I'm not sure what he was thinking, but he tried to kill himself because he had the shotgun with him. And he had the gun, I don't know if it was pointed into his mouth or how he expected to kill himself, but he missed. He shot his nose off. So every time he was in court, I'm looking at somebody with a flat face, no nose. Where the nose used to be, there's two little holes for the nostril. It was crazy. I mean, anyway, that was him. He went to jury trial. The jury found him guilty of the murder, the attempted murder, and the conspiracy to murder. I sent him off to prison for the rest of his life. I gave him a life sentence plus 2 30-year sentences consecutive. So he's going to be in prison a long time. But that was not a good situation. In 1995, I was approached by some friends. A lady, audiologist in town, Melody Willengans. And I do Melody from being in Lions with her. And her husband, Tom Willengans, was like a social worker in the school system. And I worked with him to establish the Habitat for Humanity chapter in our county. They came to me and said, "We're going to be adopting a little girl from India. And it needs to be approved, not only in India, but we need to have an adoption process here in the States as well. And would you do it? And I said, sure, I'd be glad to do that. So I handled an adoption of a beautiful little Indian girl, I mean, from India, not, I'm Native American. And in the process of that adoption, sure enough, Melody, who had trouble getting pregnant, all of a sudden now she's pregnant. So now they're having an adoption and a baby. And the baby was Sophie. And the name they gave to the little Indian girl was Molly. So they had the little dark-haired, dark-eyed Molly and the blue-eyed blonde Sophie. And a few years later, they adopted another Indian girl. And at each of these adoptions, and then maybe in between the adoptions, Sophie heard her parents say why they adopted these other two girls, because they were so special. And because the parents wanted these girls to be part of their forever family. And anyway, they really made a big deal out of the adoption and what it meant to them. So Melody comes to me and says, Andy, we've got a problem. Well, what's the problem? Sophie feels bad that she hasn't been adopted. And I said, well, we can remedy that. How can we do that? And I said, we'll have an adoption for Sophie. I'll set it up. It'll look just like the other adoptions. She will never know the difference. So we end up in court, presumably on a petition for them to adopt their own daughter, Sophie. And each of the girls got to say something. There was three girls. Now there's two that had been adopted and Sophie. And we had made this, I had my robe on, we had our clerk, we had our court reporter. I had a file. I was waving some papers from the file, although it was the paper for her sister and not for her. But anyway, then each of the girls got a chance to make a statement. They had each prepared handwritten statement in advance. And I haven't memorized these, so I'm going to read them. Sarah was one of the girls who was adopted. She was older. She was about 10 years old. She had been adopted just 1 year before that. Sarah said, I like being adopted because I will always have my family together and will never be alone or afraid anymore. The mother starts to cry a little bit. Molly reads her statement. Congratulations, Sophie, for being adopted. It means that you have a forever family like me and Sarah. I love you, even if we argue sometimes. Now the father's starting to tear up. Now Sophie gets to read her statement. I want to be adopted because my sisters were adopted. It is going to be kind of scary to me because I've never been adopted before. I think I'm going to like being adopted, though, because it will make me special and I will feel good about having a forever family, just like my sisters. My parents love us so much that they chose us specially to be their children. Now we are all adopted. And now every adult in the courtroom has tears. And of course, I approved the adoption. And on the way out of the courtroom, the clerk of courts said, Judge, I've clerked like 100 adoptions before. This is the first one I ever cried at, and it wasn't even a real adoption. So that's what I call Sophie's story. Okay, Larry Henry, I got to get moving here. Larry Henry is a murder case. There's a couple of pictures maybe in the handout. Larry Henry walks down the street in Waupun where all the prisons are. He had an apartment right on the main drag. He went to the police station. There's an airlock in the police station. Whoever was on duty was out on patrol. Nobody was actually in the police station. But if you pick up the phone in the airlock at that Waupun Police Department, it automatically calls the dispatch office at the Dodge County Sheriff's Office. He gets on the phone with the dispatcher. Officer, I need to have somebody come to the Waupun Police Department. I need to talk to them. It's pretty serious. Dispatcher says, well, tell me what it is you're going to tell them. No, I don't want to tell you. I want to just talk to an officer as soon as I can. Well, if you don't tell me what you're going to tell them, I may not have them bother to go see you. And then the guy said, okay, I'll tell you. I killed my wife a few hours ago and I'd like somebody to take care of her body. Okay, just stay there. We will get somebody. Don't move. They come and he tells them what he did. And basically, well, he, among other things, he tells them that they have a dog and the dog is in the bathroom. Here's the dog's name. If you call the dog by name, he's really friendly. He won't do anything bad. And this is where she's at. This is where our apartment is. His wife, was a schizophrenic, what am I, paranoid schizophrenic, which I felt for her because paranoid schizophrenia is like your own personal hell. And he suffered from depression. And they were in bad financial straits because whenever he would go to work, she would keep calling him and say, somebody's breaking into the house or somebody's in the back room or whatever. He would have to keep coming home, leaving work without notice to his employer. And he lost a couple of jobs that way. And he was on the verge of losing another job. And when they lost their jobs, he would get some high interest rate loans, short-term loans. And like I said, they were really in bad shape financially. He felt like they were getting pretty close to being homeless. And he felt like she could hardly handle the situation they were in, despite how nice their apartment was. But how much, he felt like how much less would she be able to handle in terms of being homeless. So he got this iron pipe or rod from work. And after he left work for the last time, I mean, on the way out, the boss said, don't come back. You've been coming and going too much. You do good work, but we can't afford to keep somebody who can't stay here all day. So anyway, he brought this pipe home, put some tape around one end of it to make like a handle or a grip. And when he got home that day, she was taking a nap. And he used the pipe on her skull, pretty much split her skull with one blow. And she obviously died. According to the statement he gave the police, he then wiped off the blood, changed her into a clean gown or robe, I don't know what she had on, held her hand for 2 hours while they played their favorite music. Then he went down to the police station and turned himself in. When the police got there, everything was the way he had said. In addition, there was like a canvas bag hanging up on a hook in the kitchen with a little note pinned onto it. Dear Mr. Police Officer, please return all of the materials in this bag to the Waupun Public Library before they become overdue. Anyway, he pled insanity. I mean, he pled guilty. He had to admit that he had killed the wife, but he joined it with an insanity plea. And if the jury found him insane, he wouldn't be criminally culpable. He would instead get mental health treatment. And we had a jury trial, about a 3-day jury trial on his mental status. And there's 3 doctors or psychologists. They all found that he had suffered from depression, but 2 of the 3 felt that it wasn't so bad, that he should be relieved of criminal responsibility. And the jury ended up agreeing with those 2 doctors, and so he was found culpable. At the sentencing, he thanked me for providing such a fair trial. He thanked the jurors for what they did. He thanked his lawyers, 2 public defenders, who are both in tears at this time. He thanks the 2 psychologists that decided against him. And he said he understood that these psychologists had some type of consulting agreement with the Department of Corrections, and that they sometimes would go into a prison to provide counseling to inmates. And he said he was so impressed by the strength of their logic and the opinions against him that he would feel honored if he could get treatment from them in the prison. The decedent, his wife, Tammy, had a sister from Kansas. And she came to testify at the sentencing. And whatever you think she might say, you're probably wrong about what you think she would say. Because what she said was, Larry Henry is one of the most lovable people I ever met, because he loved my sister and she was not a very lovable person. Please let him go as soon as possible. Another sister who actually lived in Dodge County, but had refused to give them any help, also made a similar statement, that Larry Henry truly loved our sister, and that this was really almost in the way of a mercy killing. I felt so bad for the family, for Larry Henry and for his wife, that he didn't feel like he could have had access to some type of treatment or some form of help other than killing her. There was automatically a life sentence to be imposed by me, but I could also decide whether at 20 years or some point beyond that, I would allow Larry to petition my successor. I wasn't going to be there 20 years. To petition my successor for a supervised release, a kind of a form of parole. And if I said that he could do that after 20 years, it doesn't mean that my successor would have to grant the petition, but he would have to allow him to make have a hearing. The district attorney, and I could say, he's never going to be eligible to petition for early release. Or I could say, yeah, I'm going to make him eligible after 25 years or 20 years, whatever. The district attorney, the young gung-ho guy, said, Judge, don't ever make him eligible for release. He's killed once. He's bound to do it again. Haven't you been listening to this? I mean, the circumstances were so unique that this guy killed his wife that it's never going to happen again. So I did make him eligible to petition the court after 20 years. I'm going to talk a little bit, one more thing about John Stork. We talked about treats. One of the clerks brought in a cake. Lynn Runn, our head clerk of court, brought in a better than sex cake. So I went down and I had some of this better than sex cake. So I go to John Stork's office And I'm in the doorway and he's at his desk. And I said, John, there's this cake. They call it better than sex cake. You got to go down and get some. He said, wow, that's a weird name for a cake. But anyway, so I went back to my office. A few minutes later, John Stork is at my door, very thoughtfully eating this cake. And John is so straight, and John never swears or is off color. He's a straight-laced guy. So it surprised me when he said, Andy, when they call this better than sex cake, are they thinking about sex with their husbands or? Yeah. I had a really tough landlord-tenant case one time, or when our clerk of courts brought a tray of brown or chocolate chip cookies to her office downstairs. In the afternoon, we were going to have a pretrial conference and see if we could settle this thing. It didn't look like we could settle it. They were kind of intractable. But I went down and I said, Lynn, can I take the rest of these chocolate chip cookies? Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Judge. I went back up into the courtroom and they were sitting there. And on one of the counsel tables, I put these chocolate chip cookies. I said, folks, these are really great cookies. Lynn Ron is a great baker. However, nobody's going to touch one of these cookies until this case is settled. So do what you can. Talk to each other, see what you can work out, because I would like one of these cookies too. So I leave the courtroom. About half an hour later, the lawyers come in. Hey, we've settled the case. So I'm out in the courtroom. Everybody's kind of standing around. They got a little plate. They're holding like this with their cookie. They're smiling and they're amiable discussion between them. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is how this should work. I have applied to get appointed to the Court of Appeals in Wisconsin. I had 80 letters supporting me. Half of them were from judges, half of them were from lawyers. And there, at that time, there was a committee of about 10 or 12 lawyers that the governor had appointed to screen people who wanted this Court of Appeals position. Not to screen everybody, but to screen like the 3 finalists, and I was one of the 3 finalists. And I think, I'm pretty sure that committee recommended me, but the governor ended up appointing one of his political, like the right hand, like an aide for him. And he trusted her more than he trusted somebody who hadn't worked for him. But before I found out who he had appointed, there was also an interview with the governor. So I went down to the state capitol and I entered this big room. And it was a big room, had 6 or 8 doors to it, going out to other places. And I had a big, heavy black winter coat over my sport coat or suit. I hung it up. I interviewed with the governor, and then I thanked him, and then I'm leaving. And then I grabbed this dark coat and I started putting it on, and he said, Judge Bissonnette, I just want to warn you that it may be a felony to take the governor's coat. I went to the wrong coat hanger. Oh, gosh. Shirley Abrahamson was one of the smartest people I ever met, one of the hardest working. She was born to some Jewish shopkeepers who had a business in Poland, but they got out of Poland in the early 30s before it was too late. And Shirley, like I said, was one of the smartest people, hardest working people I ever met. Don't take my word for it. She received the John Marshall Award from the American Bar Association, the Dwight Opperman Award from American Judicature Society. She was chairman of the board of the National Center for State Courts. She was chair of the Council of Chief Justices. She was a Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court for 19 years, but had been on the court for 46 years, the longest serving state justice in the country. I retired in 2013. In 2014, she was getting near the end of her term. But all of a sudden, I get a call. Back in it, this is a time when we had a landline with a caller ID. And we get a call one evening, a year after I retire. S. Abrahamson. And I said, Debbie, shit, I think this is the Chief Justice. And it was the Chief Justice. And she said that she had an executive assistant position as the Chief Justice. And she has never had a retired judge appointed to that position, and she'd like to give it a try. And would I like to do that? And I told her that I was pretty happy with my retirement, but I would consider doing it if I could do it half-time. And if it worked out well, and maybe I would expand to full-time, but I don't want to commit to full-time. She said, that's fine. Do it the way you want. So I was appointed by her as her executive assistant, and I did a number of projects during the next year before she lost her position. Once she lost her position as the Chief Justice, then I lost my position as well. But in the meantime, I had a little proximity fob where I could get into the state capitol when it was all locked up. I impressed my family a couple of times by doing that. But anyway, I had a great time with her, and it was really a privilege to work for her. I'm not sure I covered everything that I had. Let me see. Oh, though I had a number of situations involving jurors, but I think it's getting late enough that maybe we should see if there's any questions. Oh, the tree stop sign. Yeah, Terry, there's a tree stop sign. There was a case, a car accident. Somebody's on a county road, somebody's on a town road, and whoever was on the town road should have seen a stop sign and stopped, but instead they didn't, because the stop sign was all covered by this tree that was allowed by the homeowner right at the intersection, allowed the tree to grow all the way down to the ground. I'm sure that they did that because it served as a privacy screen at night, so people couldn't just look into their home when the lights were on and it was dark. But with the tree coming all the way down to the ground, it was like a privacy screen. It also was a screen for the darn stop sign, because after they had this very serious accident, the town was ordered to trim the tree back to where you could see the stop sign. It's like night and day. One picture, you can't see the stop sign at all. Once the tree is trimmed, it's like sticking out like a sore thumb. The people that were injured were on a motorcycle, and the injuries were particularly devastating. And the county got sued, the town got sued, the farm or the homeowner got sued, and their insurance company. And there was a number of motions filed, and the county wanted to get out of the suit. Town wanted to get out of the suit. They didn't think they should be in the suit. I denied that. I said, you're staying in this thing. And it went up to on appeal, and I think there were 6 different points that I had ordered, and I was affirmed on 5 of them, but I was reversed on 1. So when it went back to the trial court, the defendants were able to substitute on me because I had been reversed on that 1 point. The case ended up going to trial with a different judge there in Dodge County. The jury decided for the plaintiffs, the damages that the jury awarded were like $1.5 million. But it's rare. What you're looking at, if you have the exhibit, I asked the plaintiff's lawyer to make that exhibit. I said, I want an exhibit that has the before and after, one right above the other. And it's really rare that the Wisconsin Supreme Court would include any type of a chart or a graph or a photograph in their decision or in their official Supreme Court report. But that picture, the Supreme Court put in their decision. Their decision was like 70 pages long. And I think there was a footnote that one of the justices said, a picture can be worth 1,000 words. this picture is worth 10,000 words. And it really was. But okay. Yes.
Josh, how do you think AI would affect the judicial system? Like, you could create images, you could create videos, it could make petitions for lawyers, it
Yeah.
can draft up variety of
Yeah,
things.
it's going to be a challenge. I mean, obviously I didn't serve when there was AI. But if somebody can make things up or put a different head on a different body, or if you can do that, then you could touch up pictures of an accident scene where the skid marks were, how long they were, whatever. I don't know what to say except that, well, I'll say this. I had a jury trial with a little girl who was sexually assaulted by her daycare provider's husband. And his explanation was so bogus. And the little girl, when she testified next to me, I think when she testified, she was only like 7 years old. And in the cross-examination by the defense lawyer, all of a sudden the little girl says, "I think you're saying that I'm lying. I'm not lying. This really happened." I thought, oh my God, what a brave little girl. The jury found the guy not guilty. There was a woman detective on the case, and she kind of almost confronted one of the jurors on the way out and said, you didn't find the little girl credible?" "Oh yeah, we found the little girl credible, but one of the other jurors said that in a sex assault case, you have to have DNA evidence, and if you don't, you can't convict," which isn't true. But anyway, that juror convinced all the other jurors. So CSI, I think it's CSI and shows like that, where there's all these technologies used to solve crimes. Now jurors expect that. And if they don't get that, then they may not find somebody guilty. So for the last 20 years or more, prosecutors have had to tell jurors, this is the real world. This isn't television. This isn't CSI. Testimony is evidence. Testimony alone can support a conviction. But anyway, prosecutors around the country have to deal with that so that jurors aren't misled. It's obliquely related to your question of AI, but yes.
Do you find a difference in how cases are adjudicated with appointed judges versus elected judges? And what are the differences in outcomes and management and sequela, how things follow, et cetera?
In Wisconsin, we have a nonpartisan judiciary, although technically, officially, it's a nonpartisan judiciary. But the two most expensive judicial court races ever in the history of the country were both in Wisconsin in the last 3 years. A year ago, they spent 75 million. A couple of years before that, they spent 50 million. If a judge retires at the end of a term in Wisconsin, then the voters are going to select the successor, like in 1984 and 1989 in Dodge County. But if somebody retires or dies in the middle of a term, the governor makes an appointment. I think when the governor makes an appointment, there's a higher likelihood that the person's going to have some type of political affiliation, loyal to the governor. You know what I'm saying? And in elections, I don't think the voters are so concerned. I mean, yes, for the Supreme Court, they probably are concerned about the politics. But for a trial judge, I don't think there's a Democrat or Republican way to do a landlord-tenant case or a divorce case or a traffic case. So I think most of us really were nonpartisan. And I think and telling you what I've told you today about me and what I've done, I don't infer that I'm like a great judge or the only good judge in Wisconsin. The crummy, the arrogant guy that I ran into the first couple of years was not representative of a very big number of judges. I think 90%, 95% of the judges were very good, worked very hard, and were very fair. It was only a handful that were really kind of the bad apples. But I guess like with my Court of Appeals application, it went to the person who had the most political standing next to the governor, somebody who he knew was loyal to him. And that was a factor. If the voters had voted to create or to name somebody to the Court of Appeals, that would not have been a factor, I don't think.
I think one of the most interesting things that you described was your effort to help the juries regarding cases of whether parental rights should be terminated. Because that's one of the most delicate issues that the public has strong feelings about, and that judges have to
Yeah,
finally make decisions. Since you've made so much progress in Wisconsin in that area of the law, have you been able, now that you've worked in Ottawa County, to see whether Michigan also needs some help with the type of help, better instructions to the juries when the case is about parental rights termination?
yeah, I have not studied anything. I mean, I've been in Michigan for 4 years and I retired in 2013. Although I've done some mediation, I really haven't studied Michigan law or got involved in that type of effort, reform effort. I will say that the jury in a case like that decides whether or not there are grounds to terminate the parental rights. The jury doesn't decide to terminate. They decide, are there grounds available? Do they exist? And if the grounds do exist, according to the jury, then the judge decides whether or not to go ahead and terminate, because there's a number of other factors you might consider. So it's kind of a joint combination between the jury finding grounds and the judge deciding whether the rights should be terminated. I see another hand up over here? No. Okay. Terry, yeah.
Here and one here, and then we're probably done.
Okay.
What practices did you have while you were serving as a judge to keep your heart soft, so to not get cynical? How were you able to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, when I became judge, I discovered there was much more child sexual assault than I ever dreamed. And a lot more domestic abuse. But anyway, I didn't wear my job on my sleeve. When I went home, I was just Andy Bissonnette, the father of Henry and Peter and Joseph, and the husband of Debbie. And I had a lot of hobbies, and I like to bike, and I like to fish and kayak fish and disc golf and other things. And Debbie and I, actually, one of the things that we've done is we've read poetry, read from spiritual books every morning before we do our yoga. I've done that for a long time. I'm not sure what to say, Terry, but I didn't feel like I was case hardened or anything. I tried to live up to the commitment I made to the people, to listen carefully, to decide wisely if I could, and to announce my decisions in ways that people could understand and buy into, and to be patient. Actually, let me finish on one thing here. This is an article when I retired, and here's what I said in this article. I'm not perfect, but I'm satisfied that I was the kind of judge that I set out to be. I think that if a judge exercises patience and treats people with respect and listens, the power of listening can't be underestimated as a judge. People expect you to listen to them. They want to know that they've been heard. So if you do those things, I think you can have a positive impact on people's lives. If you don't handle it right, if you're arrogant or you belittle people or you don't listen, you've squandered the opportunity. I think that the lives of the people in front of us are too important to squander that opportunity. Thank you. I'll stick around if you have some other question you would like to talk to.